And this evening, we are bringing you Helping Families Understand Employment, the Process, Possibilities, and Benefits. And this evening, I am so pleased, and I think you will be too, to welcome Sean Roy, Chief Innovation and Training Officer at TransCen. TransCen is an agency dedicated to the belief that employment and active community participation are attainable for all individuals, regardless of disability or other perceived barriers to employment. At TransCen, Sean organizes and provides virtual trainings to states, educators, employment service staffs, and promotes meaningful employment and community inclusion. Prior to joining TransCen, Sean worked at the Pacer Center, a sister parent training information center in Minnesota, and he directed transition projects and spearheaded the creation of Pacer's National Parent Center on Transition and Employment. I will drop the link to that in the chat because if you haven't visited that yet, I suggest that maybe you'd find a lot of good resources there. And an extra plus, Sean is the sibling of an adult with a developmental disability, and he, as such, has many years' experience advocating for families and family partnerships. So I thank you all for being here, and I thank Sean for being here. And here we go. And I thank Beatrice, too, for translating. Thanks, Beatrice.
Well, thank you, Alyssa. And let me pull my slides up here, thanking everybody for joining us today. Just excited to be here. You know, I just enjoy any opportunity that I get to be able to speak to families and professionals about the topic of envisioning good lives and thinking about employment. And that's really what we want to do today, or tonight rather, is to just have a little conversation about understanding the benefits of employment, maybe understanding a little bit about how you can help your loved one prepare for employment, exploring maybe some of your feelings about the idea of a real job in the community, and giving you some tools to be able to help you advocate for your student or your loved one, whatever it is, in whatever stage of life they may be in. So we have an hour. I'm gonna go through my presentation, and then we'll leave some time at the end for questions. As Alyssa said, if you have any reactions to what it is that I've said, or questions, go ahead and throw those in the Q&A box. I think we're going to hold those off until the end, just so we can get a nice clean recording of the webinar this evening. So, as again, Alyssa mentioned, my name is Sean Roy, and I am currently serving as the Chief Training and Innovation Officer for TransCen. We are a national training and consulting organization focused on this idea of meaningful work and community inclusion for people with disabilities. And so we work nationally with agencies such as Parents Helping Parents and school districts, state agencies, federal agencies to promote the idea of a good life and the transition from school to community, employment. In fact, TransCen is short for Transition Center, and we've been around since 1986. We started in Rockville, Maryland, and I hold down TransCen's North office outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where we are currently experiencing snow and potential blizzard conditions this evening. So it's nice to be inside and be with you today. I come to this work because I am a sibling. I have a younger brother. His name is Andrew. That is he and I in the upper left. Andrew has a developmental disability, and you know, watching and living with him, and as we've navigated school and services and life, has brought me a lot of experiences. But I also spent 15 years at the Pacer Center, which is an organization very similar to Parents Helping Parents, advocating for families and talking to professionals about how to better communicate with families. So I'm really a family advocate at heart who talks a lot about employment, as is a good way to think of me. I have done a lot of work in California. In fact, I'm going to be back in Torrance, California, working with the Harbor Regional Center in mid-April, and have worked with various regional centers around California, and enjoy any opportunity I get to be able to speak to folks in your state. So The themes for today, again, 1 hour is what we have. And, we're not going to be able to touch on everything. It's not going to be a magic bullet session in 1 hour. So I hope really that this can serve as a light bulb session for you, meaning that I want you to walk away with some ideas and some strategies about how you can think about and advocate for employment for your loved one with a disability. And I also want you to walk away more energized and hopeful than when you walked in, right? And so therefore, we're not going to talk a whole lot about specific services or specific eligibility criteria. A lot of that stuff exists, and Alyssa's organization probably has a lot of that stuff. Your regional center has a lot of that stuff. I think it's important for us to have a first conversation, which is, why is employment important? Why are we talking about it? How can you view your son or daughter as a vocational being? How can you see things in a new way and help prepare for employment success? We'll talk a little bit about some of common concerns. And then really what I'd like you to do during the course of this webinar, if you could, is think about some action steps. I want you to see if there's anything that really resonates with you. And then at the end, we'll see in the Q&A if there's any action steps that you may take as a result of the information that you heard. So again, happy to be with you today. Let's start our journey. So we don't have a lot of time together. So if we were in the same room and I was doing a workshop, I would probably go around the room and I would ask all of you to answer this question. And this question I'd like to start my workshops with is, what is your loved one's greatest skill or attribute? What are the things that they bring to the table that they're really good at? Now, this allows me to begin talking about some key things around employment. And one of the key things is this idea of the difference between a skill or an attribute. Now, a skill is something that an individual can actually do, right? They can work with a certain computer program. They can make a certain dish at a restaurant. They can use a certain set of cleaners to be able to do industrial laundry. They can fix small engines. Those are skills, right, that people have. An attribute is more of uh, a trait, right? That they're friendly. They light up the room when they walk in. They're motivated. They like to make people happy. And so they're not the same thing, but we often confuse them. And when we talk about people with disabilities, we often want to talk about their attributes more so than talk about their skills. And when it comes to a conversation about employment, it is important for us to think of our loved ones as individuals with skills, because one, everybody has skills, and two, employers are looking for skills. So I want you to ask yourself, and we're not going to have you go around and answer this question, but I do want you to ask yourself, what is your loved one's greatest skill or attribute? And what happens when you answer this question is that you end up with all of these great things that an individual brings to the table. And then you can turn the question around and go, would an employer like that? Would an employer like somebody who's dedicated and who's organized, or who has a great memory, or who has previous experience with cleaning and sanitizing, or has previous experience in childcare? Again, we need to rethink about how we talk about individuals and how we talk about our loved ones with disabilities in terms of people who have skills and attributes. So I start at the very beginning with this conversation to say that today people with disabilities are doing amazing things. Now, some of you, that may be obvious. For some of you, you may need to hear that having a disability does not mean that you can't have a great life. In fact, now in 2025 may be the best time in history to have a disability. The amount of opportunities that are available for people to be able to have real work, to be able to continue their education beyond high school, to be able to be in meaningful relationships, to own their own business, to own their own house, to travel the world if they want to. So having a disability doesn't mean that you can't have a great life. And in fact, that's where we want to set the bar, is what does a good life look like for an individual, right? But there is still a lot of work to be done. And we know that individuals with disabilities in the United States do continue to experience unemployment rates that are much higher, especially those with significant disabilities, are unemployed at rates that are much higher than individuals without disabilities. They tend to live at or below the poverty line, tend to have limited housing options, opportunities for flexible housing, limited social or recreational relationship opportunities once they leave high school, and limited opportunities to be a respected voice in their own worlds and to determine their own futures, right? So those are the type of things that we are really trying to combat when we have this employment conversation. It's not just about getting a job, it's about all of the things that a job impacts. And we have to be mindful of the things that the outcomes that are typical of people with disabilities so we can continue to work to change those outcomes. So eventually I'd love to have this slide and to say this is what it used to be like, but this is now where we're at. And we're working on all of these things. But these are things, again, as family members and as professionals to be able to be mindful of. So I really I do a great deal of presenting to families uh, on the topic of employment. And I've been doing this now for close to 25 years. And this slide is really my attempt to boil down my core messages around employment. Sometimes this is if you remember one thing about this presentation, these are these are the things I want you to remember, right? This is that particular slide. And so, but I think that this is our opportunity to kind of set some expectations, right? So number one, these are the kind of employment core concepts as I see them. Number one, everyone can work. Everybody can work, right? Everybody has a skill that if we find that skill and we nurture that skill and we make a good job match and we provide the right support so they can learn the job and be supported on the job, would allow that individual to be lend value in an employment situation, would allow that individual to do real work that an employer needs to do. Everybody can work if we find the right situation. However, number two, work looks differently for everybody. So sometimes when I talk with families about employment, the first thing that they think about is, well, my son or daughter can't work 40 hours a week, and it's like, well, that's not really exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about finding situations for individuals where they can be the most successful. And that means if the individual works 40 hours a week, great. If the individual works 6 hours a week and they have a job coach right next to them to begin with, that's also okay, right? Because employment looks differently for everybody. So, as a family member who might be on the webinar today, that you're thinking about where employment might fit into the life of your loved one, that's very important to know that this can be a flexible situation, that it's not where nobody wants to put individuals in situations where they're not going to be able to succeed, but also nobody wants to undervalue individuals as well, right? So work looks differently for everybody, and we're trying to find that ideal situation. And number three, employment should be rooted in what your family member wants to do. All too often, we think about employment for people with disabilities in terms of uh, what are the jobs that nobody else wants? Or who are the companies that hire people with disabilities? Um, and there does seem to be a lot of typical jobs out there that we give people with disabilities, but people are going to be much more successful in employment if we start the job search based on an individual's strengths and interests and what they actually want to do to be able to get to that good job match. And you're going to hear me say good job match over and over again because that's really what it's about. We got to stop giving people with disabilities jobs that we think they're worthy of. And we need to begin helping people find jobs that they love because that's where they're going to be successful, right? And whoever's popping the hearts and the thumbs up, I love all of that. I don't know if you guys can see it, but I'm getting a ton of affirmation over here. So everyone can work. Work looks differently for everybody, and employment should be rooted in what the individual wants to do. Okay, so that's kind of our baseline way that we can think about some of these things. So this also gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about what I mean about employment, right? So, employment may seem like a pretty obvious thing, but you can ask, for example, uh, there are some states where individuals still work in sub-minimum wage jobs or in what we used to call sheltered workshops, right? So families will ask me, is that employment? Like, no, that's not employment because that's not in the community and they're not getting a real wage. People will ask, my daughter has volunteered at the library for the last 15 years. Is that a real job? No, that's not a real job. That's not to say that it's not a meaningful activity. It's just not a real job, right? So a real job is what we're talking about. And nationally, there's been a lot of work done on this idea of competitive employment for individuals with disabilities. And we are trying very hard to make sure everybody has the opportunity for a job in the community if they want one. Nationally, this is called or referred to as employment first. Now, employment first is not a program. Employment first is a policy initiative that says that competitive employment in the community for people with disabilities should be the first service option that we explore for individuals who get public funding. Um, and the reason that this is important is because in the past, and this still happens a lot of places in the country, individuals with significant disabilities are automatically pipelined into more restrictive programs, either into these sheltered workshops for states that still have those, or into what is referred to as a day program, which can be a work-related day program or a non-work related day program. And the problem is that these individuals and their families never get asked if they want a job in the community. Now think about all the people around the country that are sitting in either sheltered workshops or day programs who have the capacity to work, and they're never asked it or given the opportunity to work. That's why initiatives like Employment First are so important. We want to give the opportunity to people. And California is a leader in the Employment First world. You have an Employment First law, right? It's Assembly Bill 1041. You also have Employment First initiatives going on at the state level. And in fact, I think you have a website. I think there's an California Employment First website. And Alyssa, if I'm accurate on that and you know what I'm talking about, if you want to throw that in the chat box, that'd be great. But that's just to say that there's a lot of work in California being done around this idea of helping people be competitively employed. So, what is a job, right? A job is an individual job where the person goes to the business and does the work. It is not done in a group. It's not done in an enclave. It is usually a one-on-one type of a relationship. A real job is one that is integrated, meaning that the individuals with disabilities get the opportunity to work alongside people without disabilities. Now, you can have a real job, but not have it be integrated. So if you work somewhere and you have a disability and nobody eats lunch with you and nobody talks with you and nobody invites you to the staff get-togethers and you don't get invited, you don't get a turkey at Thanksgiving and you don't get a bonus at the holidays, you're not really integrated into the culture of the business. You're just kind of there, right? So this idea of integration is very important when we talk about a real job because that's where a lot of the benefits come in. Employment generally is the individual getting paid by the business and not by a service provider. And then, of course, if you work, you should get paid either minimum wage or whatever the industry standard wage is. So if a warehouse is hiring people at $21 an hour, you don't pay a person with a disability $16 an hour because they have a disability. You pay whatever the prevailing wage is for that particular position. That's what a real job is, right? A real job is where somebody pays taxes. That's what we're talking about. And why is this important? So this is another thing that I will hear quite often from families, especially of those with significant disabilities, is that they want to know why employment is important because they feel like they're either their sons or daughters, they're too disabled to be able to lend value to an employment situation, or they'll say things like, he doesn't know the value of money. Why are we talking about employment? And so it's important for us to talk with family members to say, employment brings us so many different benefits than just a paycheck. It brings us socialization. It brings self-worth and dignity. It brings purpose and it promotes mental health and it promotes a connection to something bigger. One of my favorite reasons why I think everybody should have the opportunity to be employed is that um, employment brings valued social roles to people. In this country, employment is very important. We value employment so much so that if you go to a party and you meet somebody for the first time, chances are within the first few questions, they're going to ask you, what do you do? What do you do for work? And if you think about that from a certain lens, it's kind of rude. They're just coming right out and saying it. What do you do? Well, the reason that we do that is because we are sizing people up. We are determining what their social role is. Now think about your son or daughter, and they're meeting somebody for the first time, and somebody asks them, "Well, do you work? What do you do?" And if they don't have an answer to that question, like, "Well, I'm not really doing anything right now," there's a big difference between that and saying, I work 8 hours a week currently at the grocery store, but I am working to get more hours." There's a huge difference between those two things, between not being able to say that you work and saying that you're able to work. It's that valued social role that employment gives us. It gives us a social network. It gives us people that we can lean on, that we know, that we can expand our worlds and learn new things from. So employment is so much more than simply just going someplace, getting paid, and then leaving. It is, if you think about your own jobs, a lot of you you'll get a ton of benefits from it that is much more than monetary. And all of this begins early. So it's never too early for you as a family member to think about setting the expectation for work. So some of you on the call may be families of younger individuals with disabilities. And it's never too early to be able to start talking to the school and start talking to your loved one about the fact that work is the expectation. But it's also never too late. Okay, so there also may be individuals on the call tonight who have loved ones who are in their 20s or their 30s and their 40s, and you're just now thinking about exploring employment. It's never too late. I was doing a workshop with families in Indiana, outside of Fort Wayne, Indiana, a few months ago. I was there physically, and there was a couple in their late 70s that attended the workshop with their son, who was in his mid 50s. And the son had never had a job in the community. He had always been in the day program of that particular agency. But for some reason, this family decided to come and hear about employment, which I thought was amazing. And I showed the slide, right? Work looks differently for everybody. And the dad really said, so you're telling me that when you're talking about work, you're not talking about a full-time job? I'm like, no, I'm not talking about a full-time job. And you're saying that we can find a good situation for my son because he's never had a job before. And I said, that's exactly what these people can do for you. And after the workshop, I saw him talking to the employment staff at this particular agency, asking about what employment might look like for his son. It was amazing. It's an amazing thing. So it's never too early and it's never too late. But just know that everything that you do in terms of a family and your advocacy swirls around the idea of employment. So if your son or daughters are still in school, either elementary school or middle school or high school, you should make sure that the school courses support the idea of employment, right? And skill building. So yes, maybe if your loved one is in sixth grade, you're not going to have any goals around employment, but you should have goals around the skills necessary, reading and writing, arithmetic and social skills, and using technology to be able to do jobs, right? So it's never too early, it's never too late. And oftentimes families are the ones that need to advocate for employment. So just because a professional has never said to you, your son or daughter can work, it doesn't mean that your son or daughter can't work. It just means that nobody's ever told you that before. So as a family member, you're the one that has to walk into these situations and go, I want to talk about how we're preparing my loved one for employment. That's the role of families and you as an advocate for your loved ones, because people aren't always going to do that for you, especially if your family member's got a more significant disability. That's just the way of it, unfortunately. So, and really, it's never too early, it's never too late, and there's no timeline here. It takes sometimes individuals with disabilities a little bit longer to launch into the world, right? And so I think that the transition years, the years between 14 and 22 are the hardest on families because they see all the other family members and the individuals going off and doing adult stuff, but our kids aren't really launching into the world as quickly as everybody else, but that's okay. It's not a race. And that's why I have a runway on this slide. Because some people it takes longer to launch into this world. And it may be that somebody isn't ready for employment right away at 18, but they might be ready at 20 or 24 or 25 or 30. And we got to continue to expect and help people build skills to get them to the point where eventually they're going to be ready to be able to do this. We also have to be ready to recognize and think about success in a different way. When people with disabilities try something and they fail at it, it often gets really overemphasized. And then families will go, well, we're never going to do that again. I've talked to many families who said, we tried employment and it didn't work. And I think to myself, the reason it didn't work is because we didn't find a good job match. And maybe they weren't ready at that particular time, but now they might be ready. So we can do this, and we can, as a family member, you know your loved one better than anybody. You know when they're doing a great job. You know when they're giving everything that they have. So it may be that they can go from working 6 hours to 8 hours a week. It may be that they start with one routine task and over time they get to do two or three new tasks and their job expands. It may be that they tolerate the environment, that they're able to stay focused for a little bit longer. Our job as family members is to recognize when our loved ones are doing the best that they can and that our loved ones are growing. And when we recognize that, then we can kind of take everything in stride and have a little perspective here, right? Celebrate those successes and don't be afraid to have people try new things, because failure is an option. Failure happens, and failure is an option, and that's okay because that's how we learn. Um, I do get asked sometimes if my loved one needs a job coach or some workplace supports, is it still a real job? And absolutely, it is still real work, even if an individual needs somebody there for a short amount of time or a long amount of time to help them learn and assimilate into the work culture and do the duties that are assigned, right? So needing work supports is okay, and it is still real work because the work is being done on behalf of the employer. Real activities are being done, right? So again, there's a lot of options and the ways to support people to be able to be successful on the job. And it's okay if somebody needs support. In fact, if you think about your own job, you know, we all need support to be able to do our work. Nobody works completely independently. We all need people and some type of support to be able to be successful. So I want to switch gears a little bit and give you some tips on preparing for employment success. I'm going to give you a few tools and just some strategies. I want to talk a little bit about what it is that this can look like and again, I want you armed with some ideas here. So at my organization, or the organization I work for, we use a inventory tool called the Positive Personal Profile. And the positive personal profile, a copy of the positive personal profile is going to be emailed to you with the slides after this presentation, right? So you're going to get a copy of this, and this is free. I'm not selling you anything. This is just a tool that we use, and it's a very simple one-page form that allows us to be able to take an inventory of an individual's strengths and assets. It allows us to trigger what we call a strength-based approach to employment. And a strength-based approach simply means that we are going to look at an individual's skills and talents and interests and use that as the basis of our job search. And we are not going to focus on what they can't do or the deficits, right? We cannot find a person a job based on what they can't do. It doesn't make any sense. We can find people a job based on what they can do and the good things that they bring to the table. And the positive personal profile is a tool that we use to be able to take an inventory of what an individual brings to the table. So this is what it looks like, right? A positive personal profile. It's a one-page document that asks you to be able to identify what your loved one brings in each of these categories. What are their learning styles? What are their work experiences? What are their talents? What are their values? What are their actual career goals? And we say that this is a living document. You don't want to just slide this over to a student and say, hey, fill this out, or slide this to a family and say, hey, fill this out. What you want is you want as many people who know the individual well as possible to contribute to this document. And when you build this document, you end up with this beautiful inventory of positive language about this individual. This is particularly helpful for individuals who, on the surface, maybe don't appear to be great candidates for employment. So it's our job then to retell the story, change the narrative, and say, let's look at all the great things they bring to the table rather than focus on the deficits that we think are going to keep them from being employed. So if you're a family member on the call tonight and you still have loved ones in school, take that positive personal profile to school and say, I want this to be part of the planning for transition. We want to be able to take an inventory or if your loved ones work with a regional center or a service provider in the community, you can take this tool to them and say, help me build the positive personal profile for my loved one. Because we want to tell a different story about what it is that they bring to the table. Now, another great tool that I love, I absolutely love this tool. This tool is called a vision statement. Now, a vision statement is simply a way for an individual to tell their own story, to be able to express themselves and to have somebody depicted in a positive light. So this is Andy Meredith's vision statement. Andy is a real person. He's the young man on the upper left with his buddies. He's lives in Georgia. And this was his vision statement, right? He said, I get my own studio. My job is taking pictures. I get a small house. I get married to Maggie. I also work at Publix, which is a grocery store chain in the South. It's really fun. I keep my money in the bank. I want to go to college and live in a new house by myself. My friends will come to my new house. Really, what he's saying with this vision statement is this is his vision for what he wants his life to be. That's his good life. That's his vision. He lists all of the accomplishments that he's done. He lists the things that work for him, the things that don't work for him so well. And on the left, he lists his strengths and he lists the things that he needs help with. Now, can you imagine walking into an employer with a vision statement like this rather than just a boring resume? So on this screen on the left, you'll see a URL for a website for the University of Kentucky. So this vision statement lives at the University of Kentucky. And if you follow that URL and scroll down to vision statement template, you will find a free blank version of the vision statement. You can either help your loved ones create their own, or you could have the school say, you could show this to the school or the employment program and say, this would be a really fun activity. I'd love to see my loved one have their own vision statement. It's just a wonderful, wonderful way for us to help the person have a voice and to depict them as positive vocational beings with dreams and their own goals. I love the vision statement a ton. It's one of my favorite tools that I've ever found, and I hope that you guys use it because I think that everybody should have a vision statement. So, one of the things that we know for sure in research is that individuals with disabilities who have meaningful work experiences while in school have better employment outcomes as adults. Now that's a fancy way just to say that people who have the opportunity to practice jobs that they are interested in have better employment outcomes when they leave school or when they get jobs. We all need the opportunity to practice the things that we think that we want to do or to experience that. We refer to that as a work experience, right? A work experience is just an opportunity to practice. And I think that especially if your loved ones are still in school, you should advocate for as many work experiences as possible. Because work experiences not only help a person explore if they truly want to do a certain type of job, but they also expose individuals to different types of jobs to find interests that maybe they never knew they had. And a work experience can be something as simple as an information interview, which is, let's say that your loved one is interested in working with animals. You could contact a veterinarian and say, can my loved one come and buy you coffee and interview you for 20 minutes about what it means to work in a veterinary clinic, right? So it's a very simple kind of work experience. Let's say that work experience goes well, and then you could say, "Hey, can I come and visit you at the vet clinic?" That's called a job shadow. I just want to observe, right? I just want to observe and see if this environment is something that I'd be interested in. Volunteering is another great work experience. Sometimes in high school, students have access to summer internships, great work experiences. The best type of work experience is a paid job, though, right? So there's nothing that says that people with disabilities need any kind of program to be able to go and get a job. Your son or daughter can go right now anywhere, fill out an application and get a job if they are accepted. Now, sometimes people with disabilities need extra supports to be successful on the job. That's something to take into account. Now, how can families play a role in this? I feel very strongly that family members need to be active participants in the employment process. You are not passive participants in all of this. You have a role to play and a very, very important role to play in that. And one key role that you can play is using your networks to be able to access work opportunities. So let's say that your son or daughter is interested in working with animals, and you want to do an information interview with a veterinarian, but you don't know any veterinarians. Well, what you can do is you can access your own personal network. We all have networks. People, our friends and family, our neighbors, people we work with, people we worship with, book club, golf club, poker buddies, whatever the case may be. These are all people that we know, and those people know people, and so on and so forth. It becomes a web. So it is important that we access these people and say, hey, my daughter's interested in working with animals. Does anybody know anybody that does that? And eventually you're going to run into somebody that does, and you're going to be able to have a contact to give to the school or to give to Voc Rehab or to give to the work program to say, hey, let's talk to these people about a work experience. It's a very valuable function that you and as families can play to be able to help make that happen. So most of us um, built responsibility by having chores when we were growing up, right? And it's important that as family members, we take the opportunity to build responsibility in our loved ones because no matter what job they choose, they are going to be expected to be responsible, to be able to show up on time, to do the tasks assigned to them, to be respectful, all of these types of things. And again, the number one way that we did that starting out was the chores that we had growing up, right? And so I would strongly suggest that if you do not have any chores that are regularly scheduled and assigned to your loved one in the home, that you do that because it's a great way to practice work. I would also say that if your son or daughter has had the same chores for a long time and they're really good at them, then give them different chores. Keep building that responsibility, right? And if they can do that in the home, they can carry that over into the work situation, right? So that's one good reason why we decide to do chores. Other ways to think about building responsibility would be to make sure that they're doing the best that they can on the schoolwork, that they're turning it in on time, and that they're showing appropriate soft skills or social skills. And if these things are an issue for your son or daughter, that's where you can ask either your employment program or your IEP team and say, hey, we need to do a little work around this. So it's a good way to identify potential needs as well. Another great way to build skills and talents is to be able to get involved in things in the community that are other than school, right? So if your loved one is still in school, sometimes life becomes pretty routine and isolating for kids with disabilities. They go to school and then they go home, they go to school and then they go home, they go to school and they go home, and they don't have much beyond that. There's a lot of benefit that can be found in being involved in community activities or school extracurricular activities. Things like a choir or a theater club or sports, Special Olympics or uh, regular sports, video game clubs, or any kind of club that's a specific interest. Maybe you've got things through your church, community education programs, Boy Scouts. I just think it's a great way to build skills, and it's a way that a lot of us build skills, right? We were involved in things in high school and we had to learn how to work together towards a common goal and play a role in something. So if you get the opportunity to get your loved ones involved in something other than the basic routine of everyday life, I think it's going to benefit them greatly. Okay? Now, again, we've talked a little bit about this school, and it's important that if your loved one is still in high school, chances are they have what's called an individualized education program or an IEP. The IEP is the legal document that dictates what type of classes and services and supports a student with disabilities receives. There should be goals on the IEP starting at age 14 that that reflect a focus on employment or post-secondary education or independent living. Those three areas need to be seen on the IEP. So I strongly suggest that you go to your son or daughter's IEP team and go, what are the goals that we are working on to help prepare them for employment? A lot of times I see that it's the same goals or they're not really good goals. And so you as family members have to advocate and say, no, I'd like to see something a little bit more robust. And remember those work experiences, right? Work experiences are so important. So make sure that later on in the high school years that you are advocating for work experiences, opportunities in the community to practice employment. So some good questions to ask schools usually are, what are the pros and cons of keeping my student in a transition program? If you have such a thing, 18 to 21 programs usually. How is the commitment to employment represented in the IEP? So that's what I just said. Where are the goals there? How are my students' strengths taken into account when exploring employment? What opportunities will my student have to explore jobs they're interested in, and how will they be connected to post-school employment supports? So you can take these slides when they're sent to you and you can ask these questions of your IEP team to be able to make sure that good things are being done during the school years. And the school is essentially the gatekeeper during these years. So if we let those years slip by, then there's so much work that isn't done because it never happened during the school years, right? So just make sure that you're reading what the school is sending you. If you're not understanding it, make sure you contact an advocate like Parents Helping Parents, and just make sure that you're taking full advantage of the entitlement of the free and appropriate public education and the special ed services. So um, I know that the prospect of a real job in the community can be a scary prospect for families. And you may have a lot of questions about what it is that it looks like. And that's okay. First of all, I want you to know that having questions and concerns is 100% normal. Nobody is ever going to make you feel bad about having a question about your son or daughter with a disability and being safe in the community, right? And families often have questions about vulnerability or safety or who's going to hire them or will they lose their Social Security benefits, right? I encourage you to tell people about these concerns because when you're telling people about what your concerns are, you're also telling them what you need. And I would hate for you to make a decision not to have your loved one explore employment because you've got some concerns that you never told anybody about, right? It's okay to have concerns, but make sure that people know about them so you could get support needed to be able to do that. Finally, I want to talk just a little bit about this idea of Social Security. This is not a Social Security workshop, but a lot of times families have misconceptions about the role Social Security benefits play in employment. And what I want to say to you is that Social Security is not a magic bullet, and people are almost always better off if they actually are working. And so make sure that you are availing yourself of the resources in California to get your questions answered. And there are a lot of great resources to be able to contact to so for you to be able to figure out what does employment look like if your loved one receives either SSI or SSDI. So those resources on the screen, very, very important and helpful to you as you do that. And there may be other resources as well. This is not an exhaustive list. These are just the ones that I could find. I'm sure that Alyssa could also point you towards some other types of resources as well around benefits planning. So generally, when we talk about employment resources or supports, they are either delivered by your state's vocational rehabilitation system. In California, it's referred to as DOR, or they're done through a DD waiver services. And I think those services are administered through the regional center system. So if you're wondering, like, well, who helps with employment? You can either contact your local regional center and they can route you through to the right place to start, or you can contact your local vocational rehabilitation office and they can route you to the right place to start. Um, but that's again, I don't like to talk too much about disability supports. I want to have these other conversations first. But again, you may want to explore what these supports look like to help your son or daughter. So, as we said earlier, what I really hope that you do during the course of this is think about what are some aha moments or some takeaways or some action steps that you might take as families to help your son or daughter begin on that journey to employment. Making sure that you have high expectations and set a vision that employment's going to be part of their life. To celebrate and cultivate strengths and to recognize challenges and address them, and to find the information and support you need as the family member to be able to move forward with the process. Just a little bit about us. You can find more about TransCen at transcen.org. You can follow us on social media. We do a lot of our stuff on LinkedIn. So if you're a professional, you can follow us on LinkedIn. Just remember it's TransCen with a capital C. And if you want to know a little bit more about what we do and want to contact us directly, there's an email there, or you can contact me directly. My son drew this avatar for me, and I love it. And that's my email. You can feel free to contact me directly. But I wanted to save a little time for the questions that may have popped up. So, Alyssa, what I'd like to do is throw it back to you, and let's see what questions, if any, people had.
Well, thank you so much. And now I hope everyone out there sees why I thought you would be pleased to have Sean Roy presenting to us this evening after that wonderful presentation. Let me just please, as I told you, I was going to be dropping some links into the chat. I have done so. There's a Spanish evaluation and an English evaluation. Please click on one of those links. 4 very easy questions. Please evaluate the workshop and let us know so we can continue to bring more of these to you. Okay. I'd like to start off the questions. We have just a few minutes left, and maybe is it okay, Sean, if we go over just maybe about
Sure.
5 minutes? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Um, I'd like to first start out a question by a self-advocate who says, how do I help my family myself? So he wants to know some tips that he can do to help his family help him to prepare for
Mhm.
employment.
I think that the vision statement that I showed a little bit earlier in the presentation is a wonderful way for you as a self-advocate to tell the world what your plans are. To tell the world, here are my dreams, my goals, this is what I want to explore. And when you do that, you can get your family on board because everybody works towards a common vision, right?
Mm,
I think that would be the number one thing that I would start with is tell the world, this is what I want for myself. But now, too, you know that there are some resources like the regional centers and Voc Rehab that you can use specifically around employment. And as a self-advocate, you can take the lead on contacting those agencies. And in fact, you don't, if you can do it yourself, with a little support from your family, that's great.
Yeah. And just a little aside, I checked that vision statement link and it wasn't correct. So I found the correct one and dropped it in the
Really?
chat, and I will send it to you too, Sean, if you want.
Yeah.
Just a couple, sometimes they change around their links, so
You
a
know,
couple of
I
letters were
have some
missing.
trouble with that link sometimes, and so please send me the one that you found that was
I will be
that
happy
worked
to.
because
And
yeah,
yeah,
perfect. Thank
well,
you.
I like to do that because sometimes, I get caught off guard too, and links I send to people aren't working. So we have each other's backs.
Awesome.
So I'll send it out in the email, and I'll send it to you as well, Sean.
Thank you.
Um, okay, so what are we were talking about vision statements. So what are some strategies for vision statements and work experience when an individual is non-speaking? My son cannot communicate his goals.
That's right. There's that's again another area where families come in and I think are very, very important. Because an individual is nonverbal doesn't always necessarily mean that they're not able to communicate in some way, shape, or form. If the individual uses some form of assistive technology, or even something as simple as a picture board to be able to point to things that they're interested in, and a vision statement doesn't necessarily have to be as complex as the one that I showed you. A vision statement can be as simple as here are the things that I enjoy. Here are the places I might like to work. Here are the people I enjoy being around. Do you know what I mean? And so the one that I showed you was a very formalized version of a vision statement, but you can have a simple version and you could use again something like a picture board or even knowing, as a family member, you can say, "Hey, I'd like to include this. Are you okay with that?" And if they can communicate with you even a simple kind of a yes or no, you can help guide that process.
Uh, okay, great. So a couple of folks are asking the same kind of question. How do we find the job shadowing or the volunteering or the internship opportunities for our kids?
Yep.
What do we do to find those?
And so, well, the first thing that I would do is if your son or daughters or loved ones, whoever you're here representing, are still in school, then the first step I would take is approach your IEP, special ed case manager. California has some wonderful programs around employment during the transition years. And so it is just a matter of you as a family member going and saying, I'm really interested in preparing for employment. What can we do to be able to do that? One of the programs that I listed on a slide, but I didn't really talk about, is something called PREETS or Pre-Employment Transition Services, PRE-ETS. Most of the schools in because it's a national program, most of the schools in California should have PREETS. And that is another way for an individual to explore in early stages careers that they might be interested in.
Student services with the Department of Rehab in California also helps. And I think it's the 26th of March, we have folks from the Department of Rehabilitation coming to talk all about student services. So
Yeah,
please look on the calendar, register, and come back for that one. Uh,
100%.
let's see. Are there any career development books you'd recommend for guiding parents who have youth with disability?
There's no books
You
that
should
I
write
there.
one, Sean.
Well, yes, I will. Mine will be coming out next week. No, there's no books that I have found that are available for families, but there are books in general that guide the process. And there is one called The Road to Work. and it is by Richard Luking, and I think it's Luecking, but I could be wrong. But you're right. There isn't like when it comes to a book. No, I don't know of anybody that's compiled kind of a process specifically for that audience.
Okay, and I am just going to direct everyone's attention to the chat again, where I will drop the links to the evaluations once again. And uh, just please, I know I tend to be a little annoying about this, but if you fill them out and we're able to share them with funders, we're able to keep bringing things like this to you. And I think you're going to agree with me that this was quite a great presentation this evening. So I'm going to leave them open just a little bit longer, and maybe we'll take one more questions. How about, I'm not sure if you know the school programs in California which are available to help prepare for employment. You did mention the pre
Yeah.
ETS. There's Workability One. Some
Mhm.
high schools have, some don't. Some high schools have something called a transition partnership program. And these are memorandums of understanding, MOUs are called, that the schools have with either Department of Rehab or other agencies. And then there is this student services with the Department of Rehab if your school doesn't have a TPP, Transition Partnership Program, or Workability One. So we do have videos on Workability One and TPP, and I will put those links in the email that I send out to you. But do you have anything to add to that, Sean?
I honestly don't. And the because we do our work nationally, we don't always know the nuances of every single state. And I know that there's some things happening in various states. I know that workability and the pre-ets, and it may be that your specific district has a unique type of a program. Unfortunately, what I do find is that in districts that are a little bit larger, more resource rich, they do have a little bit more opportunity. In districts that are rural or maybe urban, they don't always have the same type of opportunities, and that's around the country, unfortunately. So uh, yeah,
That is true. Let's see, we did that.
we did
Uh,
have some in the chat box. We had some
Yes, I'm
questions in
no,
the chat too.
yeah, I'm noticing them too. But it is 7:35, and we don't want to keep Sean. We don't want to overstay our welcome here. Could you maybe just talk about diplomas? We had an event last week about the alternative pathway to diploma, which is now legislated in California, and school districts are figuring out how to actually make this work for folks with moderate to severe disabilities. But what is your take about diploma versus certificate and the desire around really striving to get that diploma?
Well, one of the things that I have found that is a challenge with things like certificates is employer requirements. And so if employers require a high school diploma, and they don't always know the difference between a diploma and a certificate, right? And so it can be maybe semantics, but sometimes that does cause an issue. My feeling is usually that if the individual has the ability to be able to get a diploma, they should get a diploma. My feeling is also that the state of California should continue to work towards making sure that the certificate is also recognized by employers as essentially an equivalent. So it satisfies base level requirements of getting a job. So that's just where, I mean, to me personally, I think you should do whatever is the most rigorous because that leads to more opportunities. But just that's my take on it from the employment side of it.
Okay, thank you. And we do have a few more questions, but as I said, people who come to these often, I like to keep to my word and not go too far over.
Mhm.
Is there any closing remark that you'd like to make, Sean? One nugget of wisdom to make sure everybody remembers as they leave tonight? I think you mentioned them. That was your first slide.
I would say to all the families that in some of the people that post some questions, Supporting your loved one towards employment success takes perseverance and it takes knowledge. So continue to ask questions and continue to keep opening doors to be able to find the people that can answer those questions for you. There are community-based providers like organizations that do employment for people with disabilities. They're good resources. I have found that the regional center folks have been really good, at least the ones that I have worked with. And you have wonderful advocacy organizations such as Parents Helping Parents, and DD, councils on developmental disabilities, and you have disability specific organizations that can help you. Keep digging, right? Keep digging and just know work is possible. Work is possible for all people of all types of disabilities. And so it's just a matter of finding that right situation.
And believing in it, having those high expectations.
Exactly.
We have lots of webinars on parents having high expectations.
Yep.
Okay, so thank you so much, Sean. Now you know why I wanted you to come and speak to our community. You're getting lots of love, lots of hands clapping, lots of thank yous in the chat. It was a great presentation. I agree with everyone. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.